We're thrilled to have music industry icon and the Honourable Member for Kingsford Smith, Mr. Peter Garrett. I get you wrote a song called, or co-wrote a song called US Forces. We're now, our country's involved in a war which our own Prime Minister admits isn't going particularly well.
He's noticed. He's been the last leader on the planet to figure that one out too.
What's your opinion on what should happen next? I mean, I guess, I imagine that at the time you would have said, let's not go in. Is that a fair enough assessment?
Yeah, look, I always actually thought it was an illegal war. And I think
because of the UN's position?
That's right. And because it was based on this idea that we thought that someone was going to do something to us, therefore we were going to invade them. I mean, that's actually contrary to international law. However much a person is a tyrant or whatever, you can't actually just go and punch them out because you think that they might do something to you. The second thing is that the idea of it was going to deal with terrorism, it was going to bring democracy to the Middle East, and it was actually going to make that region more stable. Now, it's had completely the opposite effect. I mean, that's the effect there. If you look at the debate in America, people are really saying, look, this is a total shambles. We need to have a staged process that will get us out of this mess. We need to stop seeing people getting killed, and we need to start working in the region to do it. But so long as we're in there, we're just going to continue to make the mess even worse. And that's Howard's policy. You know, I mean, the Americans will decide to move out, and John Howard will still be there. You know, it's outrageous when you think about it.
I mean, recent polls, or fairly recent polls, suggested I think 71% of Americans are dissatisfied with Bush's handling of the whole thing. Do you think Howard... Well, why do you think that Howard hasn't had that sort of reaction here?
Look, it's a really interesting question, and I reckon we should think about it as we head to Christmas. One of the reasons would be that luckily and thankfully, no Australians have been killed. I mean, we've lost one life. What are the Americans up to? 2,000 people, you know, in body bags, you know. 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, hundreds of thousands of people injured and maimed and killed. But we've just, thankfully, been spared that. I think as soon as we ended up in a situation where Australian loss of life started to happen, people would look much more seriously at it. It's a long way away from where we are now. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know why people haven't focused on it a bit more. Maybe we need to talk about it more too.
Do you think we value Australian lives above Iraqi lives and American lives, and do you think that's appropriate?
I think that we probably do. I think that's natural. Whether it's appropriate, and that's a good question, John, but ultimately, you've got to ask yourself whether going to war with people, spending... I mean, we've spent $2 billion over there, you know. Now, that money could have been spent on security issues in our region. It could have been spent on helping poor people in the South Pacific. It could have been spent on fixing up our schools and hospitals. Instead, what have we done? We've increased the prospects of terrorism and made the Middle East an absolute nightmare.
It is ironic, isn't it, that the reason we went to war allegedly was because Saddam Hussein's regime was breaking the UN rules on weapons of mass destruction, but I suppose we've actually gone in there when the UN weren't necessarily endorsing that war. Is that an irony that you think has been lost on...
I think history's going to judge Howard very harshly on the war. I think history's going to judge the Australian public, interestingly. I mean, I was a part of a whole bunch of people. Australians were opposed to it at the start. We marched, we exercised our great democratic rights, you know, to stand up and say, hey, we don't reckon this is on, this is good. But Howard managed to maintain, if you like, control of the debate, and our minds went on to other things. And I think that when you consider where our national security interests lie, you've got to ask yourself a question, is it over there or is it in places closer to home? Now, our view very much is that it's in places closer to home. And I think that we've been incredibly lucky because the Defence Forces have been stretched. They've been in the Solomons, they've been, you know, in Afghanistan, they've been in Iraq. They're just holding it together, and I think they're doing an absolutely wonderful job. But it's only a matter of time, whether it's Afghanistan or somewhere else, that we start to see, regrettably, some casualties. And I think when that starts to happen, there'll be much more forensic examination of actually what Howard's policy is. And I mean, frankly, he has said that he's not doing it because it's electorally sort of popular for him. So I'll give the Prime Minister credit for saying that. You know, he says, well, look, I actually believe in it. It's just that it's a terrible war. But he believed that Vietnam was okay as well. And he said a couple of weeks ago that if he had his chances again, he'd still support the fact that we're in Vietnam. So I think it just tells you a bit about Prime Minister Howard.
We need to take a break. Will you stay with us?
Of course I will.
Peter Garrett, everybody.